Hello and welcome to Hey Ask Me Stuff, the show where you out there in the internet land get to ask me stuff. But as you can probably see, if you got really good vision, you're looking over this shoulder here, you're not just asking me stuff today. We'll get to him in just a second. He's just a little speck on the screen right now, but don't worry, we'll get closer on him in a second. My name is Ken Coughlin. I'm a Christian apologist coming to you not live this week, but coming to you from Trinity Lutheran Church and School in Joppa, Maryland. Normally, we are live every week, but this week, for obvious reasons, we're not. We're pre-recording this when someone's available. And who that someone is, that would be Pastor Ben Lander. Hello, Ben. How you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you, Ken?
I'm doing real well. Those of you that don't remember Pastor Ben, if you're somebody that's joined us recently here with the Hey Ask Me Stuff era, Pastor Ben used to just be plain ordinary Ben several years ago, and he was here with us at Trinity, and he and I did a podcast called Trinity Talk Live for multiple years. I can't even remember how many years we did it for. And then our last episode was the beginning of November 2021 when Ben abandoned me. I guess he had good reason. God decided Ben needed to go somewhere else. So, Ben, why don't you tell people what you've been up to?
Yeah, so it's Ken said, it's kind of hard to believe. It's been 2 years now since November 2021. But yeah, God called us. So we're now serving at a church in Muncie, PA. So we're St. Andrew Evangelical Lutheran Church is where we are now, my family and I. And we've been there since November of 2021. And, God's just been blessing us. In that time, I've been ordained, of course. And so, yeah, the congregation's been great. We've been seeing growth and everything, so that's been wonderful. And just a different feel, small town feel. But of course, I miss being here with Ken and everybody here at Trinity Lutheran, and it's just great to be back. Great to share some worship with everybody this morning. And so, uh, yeah,
Well,
wonderful.
I'm glad, Ben, that you get to be part of, you get to finally do a show in the studio. For those who don't know, Ben, back when we were doing Trinity Talk Live, the vision of this studio was starting to come to fruition. And you were actually here when construction had started on it, weren't you?
Yeah, I never got to see the completed work until now, so this is kind of like coming full circle.
So I am thrilled that you get to be a part of it, and we're able to not just relive the old times here of Trinity Talk Live, but you get to be here in studio and see what the vision came to be. Um, so this is still Hey Ask Me Stuff. So those of you that if this is your first time watching, let me tell you a little bit about what this show is all about and how it works. This show is entirely viewer driven, meaning that our viewers out there in the world, you submit questions that you would like to see us talk about on an episode. And the way you do that, if you have a question you would like to see us talk about, you go to this website, trinityjoppa.org/ask me stuff. On that website, you will find an online form that you can fill out to submit your question. Click submit, and you never know, you might see your question on a future episode here. Also, like I said, normally we're live on Tuesday evenings at 6:30 p.m. This episode is not live, it's pre-recorded. But if you are watching us live, we do invite you to comment in the live chat and be part of the conversation. We can actually interact back and forth. Obviously, we can't do that today, but we'd still love to hear what you have to say. I guarantee you, Ben is going to be showing this episode to his entire congregation when he gets back. And so he will absolutely respond. I'm going to promise for him to every single comment that anybody makes in the live chat, and I will sit back and laugh. No. Um, so, no, but seriously, let us know what you think about it. Put your comments in the comment section. We'd love to hear what your thoughts are. Speaking of that, I'm going to talk a little bit about or introduce what our topic for the day is, and then we will dive right into it. What do you say, Ben? You
Sounds
ready?
good.
You're
Yeah.
ready. Okay. Well, here is our topic of the day. How should the church react to Sunday youth sports? The question that we got submitted to us online was basically asking for, I mean, I think part of this question is the the idea that, obviously, what should we as Christians be prioritizing? But I also think there was an angle to the way the question was asked that was how do we, those of us that even do prioritize church, how do we interact? What should we feel about people who are prioritizing, if you want to call it that, youth sports on the weekends over coming to church? How do we communicate that? What do we think of them? How do we handle that situation? Do we go up and we go, judgy, 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 you're going to hell? I'm going to say no, that's not the way to handle it. Um, but I've got some thoughts, but because I know nobody is watching this show to hear what my thoughts are, Ben, I'm going to start with you. I'm sorry, I'm going to keep saying that because I'm used to it. Pastor Ben,
You can just say Ben. That's fine.
what just introductory thoughts? What when because you picked the topic. I gave you like 5 or 6 to choose from, and you chose this one, so you must have some thoughts. What are they?
Yeah, when Ken first sent me this list of topics to choose from, this one kind of stuck out because it is very relevant, at least in my experience. For those who may not be familiar, I started here at Trinity. Oh goodness, 2011. So it's been 13 years
It
ago.
was the Stone Age and then you. That's what it
Yeah.
was, yeah.
So when I started here, I was in youth ministry, and even back then, and it's been going on since before then. That's always been kind of a conflict with whether it's with youth ministry or church on Sunday. Youth sports specifically has popped up here and again as conflicts of time, conflicts of commitment, especially if you've got children who are on travel leagues. They go everywhere during the week and on weekends and Sunday mornings. And so it's a challenge for those who work in ministry. And I kind of see both sides of it, honestly, because our son, Levi, is in sixth grade now. He just started playing football. And so one thing that we do appreciate is that their league that they're in, they don't have, well, they do have games on Sunday, but it's always in the afternoon. So they don't have practice or anything Sunday morning. So there's no conflict for us yet. However, we may anticipate that. We've had conversations, my wife and I, about, well, obviously for us being a pastor, that's not a this really is no
You're kind of
conflict for us.
booked
You're
on
kind
Sunday
of
mornings, yeah.
exactly. So yeah, that's one thing that it's a sacrifice. We view it as a sacrifice, even if that's something that were to come up on a Sunday morning. We would have to make that sacrifice and say, well, we can't participate this week. Hopefully next week it'll be at a time, even if it is on a Sunday, at a time that we could participate in. So I would say right off the bat, that the question, I like the way you framed it, Ken, was, should we be judging people and saying, this is bad, you're not prioritizing it? I think, like we talked about here, in Romans, everything is permissible, not everything's so beneficial. It is about prioritizing things. I think it's not that sports are bad. It is that they can be in conflict with church commitment sometime. And so, how do you choose that? How do you weigh that? I hope that there's going to be sports in heaven. So I'm not saying anybody who plays sports is, choosing a evil thing. It's not evil. It's just kind of neutral in its own. But anything has that potential to become. Uh, we can prioritize it above spending time with God and His Word. And I know some of the articles you printed off here kind of go into maybe some creative ways that we can look at this. In our worship. What does worship look like? How do we define that? And so,
Yeah, let me introduce that. And it's funny you say that you think that anything could be, that obviously there's nothing per se bad about sports. And I think, God can use anything. I think the timing is pretty funny because as you learned, because you were just preaching here this morning, I'm sure you saw the video we played
mhm.
that we got here at Trinity. We got approved for a grant to operate and start up a Night to Shine, which is the special needs prom that's sponsored by the Tim Tebow Foundation. And of course, we had like no time. We found out about this like right before Christmas, and the event is February 9th. And so we're putting together this massive thing. We have like 2 months to do it, like 18 days left. And so everybody's around here going frantic. But I look back on that and I look at all the wonderful work that Tim Tebow has done through this foundation. And let's face it, how did he get his platform? He got it through sports.
Mhm.
He got it through University of Florida and then the Denver Broncos and all that. And so I think that obviously God used that and uses even his sports celebrity, if you want to call it that, to bring about good. But talking about worship, you mentioned worship, and so I do want to bring this up. And this is the first Bible verse I wanted to talk about today is Romans 14:5. I'll read it first, and I'll tell you the context that one of the articles that I had come across that mentioned this verse in. It says, one person considers one day more sacred than another. Another considers every day alike. Each of them should be fully convinced in their own mind. And the article that I read was basically using this verse to say, hey, look, according to this author, observation of the Sabbath, or the strict observation of a particular day of the week as a Sabbath, they're saying is a what they call a disputable issue. In other words, it's something that Christians can, in good conscience, disagree about. Not true under the old covenant, when God was very clearly saying you have to honor the Sabbath day is holy, you have to honor it. This person is saying, well, the particular day, a particular day set aside, that's not so much mandated anymore. Number one, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that. Obviously, we don't observe the Sabbath on the same day that the Jews did in the Old Testament. But I guess what I'm interested to hear your thoughts on, Ben, is not just, do you believe that the Sabbath command is still as viable today as it was under the new covenant as it was in the old covenant, but also, um, I had a second follow up and now I've completely forgotten what it was. Uh, there was a brilliant thought that I had. So why don't we start with that one, and then when I remember what my thought was, I'll follow up with it.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, so the Sabbath command, obviously, like you said, Ken, we don't celebrate it on Saturday. That's the Jewish Shabbat, Sabbath. And, actually, I've had wonderful conversations with Christian brothers and sisters who feel very strongly, one way or another, that we should be celebrating it on a Saturday because that's the actual Sabbath. And if you don't celebrate it on the actual Saturday Sabbath, then that Jewish Sabbath, then you're not really keeping the commandment. Um, Obviously, we don't do that, but a lot of churches don't do that. We celebrate on a Sunday, and there's historical reason for that. The early church celebrated on Sunday as a mini resurrection day. Christ was raised on a Sunday, so it's a mini resurrection that we celebrate every single Sunday. And yeah, so I think of course, what Paul's saying here in Romans too, that one person considers one day more sacred than another considers every day alike. Jesus himself, he says, man was not created for the Sabbath, but the Sabbath for man. And so he is Lord of the Sabbath, right? So when he was accused by the Pharisees of doing work on the Sabbath, it became very, very strict. Very, you can't even drag a chair across to sit in because you're drawing a line in the sand, and that means you're plowing.
You can't heal on the
You
Sabbath.
can't heal on the Sabbath.
Right?
Exactly. Yeah, a lot of things that Jesus did, he was accused of.
Violating the Sabbath law.
Exactly, and so.
I remember what my follow up was, and
Mhm.
it actually does kind of tie into what the second Bible verse was that I wanted to bring up. So let's say that somebody brings up this Romans passage to you and says, "All right, the Sabbath day is an old covenant thing. It's something that some Christians today observe, some others don't. So you really can't get on me about not coming to church on Sunday because that's not real. Instead, I'm going to youth sports instead because that's not really something we have to observe under the new covenant." But then we get to this Hebrews passage.
Mhm.
All right. Hebrews chapter 10, verses 24 and 25, which says, "And let us consider how we may spur one another on toward love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day approaching." So, is there a risk of taking this? The Sabbath was an Old Testament covenant thinking too far to the point where you say, okay, well, I guess my thought process on it is just because you say that this, even if you say that the Sabbath command is no longer binding under the new covenant, that doesn't mean that we can use that as an excuse to totally give up meeting together. And so if you're going to tell me you're not meeting on Sunday, I guess my question is, well, then how are you fulfilling this instruction from Hebrews 10?
Right, and that's kind of the rub, right? So that's not, you know, we're not bound to the Old Testament meeting on the Sabbath, on the Jewish Sabbath on Saturday, but we have freedom in that to meet and still meet together. Actually, uh, they met together daily, right? They were in the apostles' houses. They broke bread and ate together, and people were adding to their number daily those who were being saved. Um, so we're not doing that anymore. But so there's not really indication here of how often, how frequent, or specific dates and times. Um, so that I would give a pass on and say, okay, fair enough. It maybe not doesn't have to be on a Sunday, but you're right. We still are supposed to meet together, right? And the fact of the matter is, at least in American churches, Sunday is when we meet together. Maybe Wednesday nights or something like that if you get Bible studies throughout the week. But the big day that we meet together is on Sunday. So how, if it's a consistent thing, I understand maybe one thing here or there, something pops up. Um, you're sick, even, there are legitimate reasons, but we should continue to meet together. And so I think it's not uh, doesn't satisfy my understanding, my piety to say, and of course, being a pastor, like you said, our Sundays are kind of booked anyway, and so well that creates its own kind of confusion too, because you're also not supposed to work on the Sabbath. It's supposed to be a day of rest, but those who are in ministry, it's still kind
It's
of
the
a day of
busiest
work
day
for.
of the week for us, you know?
Exactly. So how do we have a Sabbath, right? It's more about the rhythm that God created in the 7 days when He created, and the seventh day He rested, not because He was tired. He's God. He doesn't get tired, but He created that as a model that we should have this cycle, this rhythm of work and rest, work and rest. So it's not only a day of rest, but it's a day of refillment, being fulfilled, being refilled, and coming together to worship and be empowered for the week ahead.
Yeah, that's something that one of the articles mentioned that I really connected with as well. And it's not one of the things that we all, I think, know and realize, but it comes to play in this particular context is we always talk about the Sabbath as being his day of rest. And we understand that, yes, we need rest. I mean, that's the whole point that God was exemplifying for us, for example, in the creation narrative. Did God need to rest? Well, no, God's omnipotent, right? But he was modeling rest for us because we needed rest. But it's more than just chilling out because I'm tired. You know, it's it's a day of rest and devotion and dedication to God. And so I guess that's part of my question. I think this is kind of something similar to what you just hit on is even if I were to say, all right, I I I don't need to do youth sports on Sunday, or I'm doing youth sports on Sunday because I don't need to worship on Sunday. I can get my rest on another day. And I think the way one of the articles put it, and I can't find it right now, is like a lot of people will take this could take this to mean it's like, okay, so I go play sport, have my kid play sports on Sunday, and then I chill out on the couch on Monday, and I get my rest. If that's what you're doing, though, aren't you missing part of what Sabbath rest is supposed to be about? It's not just chilling out on the couch; it's also drawing closer to and worshiping God.
Absolutely. It's the reason that we celebrate the Sabbath is the same reason that we give offerings, right? It's a giving of the first fruits. We give of the first fruits of our money. We also give of the first fruits of our time. For us in Western culture, the first day is Sunday of the week. We give of the first part of our week or daily. You start off your day in prayer. We try to do that with our kids. We have devotions every morning before they go to school and prayer time and at night, all throughout the day. But there's something about giving of your first fruits that is an act of worship.
Yeah, and I want to hit on a couple other things that I found in these articles, just things that made me go hmm. And then I will tell you what I'm leading up to, just so you know. The very last question I'm going to ask you, also, so you know, this will help you know what we're almost done too, is okay. Understanding everything we've talked about now, how do we communicate to someone who is making the choice to bring their kids to sports on Sunday? So that's coming, but don't answer it yet. Um, because another thought that I had that I'm curious to hear what your thoughts on, there was one of the articles I mentioned, like it was giving advice to parents who are choosing to bring their kids to these sports. And one of the first things it said that they should have in their mindset is to be realistic about your child's athletic prospects. And it said, according to the NCAA, only 3.4% of high school boys basketball players play in college. And of those who play in college, only 1.2% will be drafted by the NBA. And of course, there's similar statistics across other sports. So, the first piece of advice they give is to parents is to be realistic about your child's athletic prospects. However, I think the response that a lot of people give to that is, hey, look, I'm not having my kid participate in athletics because I think they're going to be in the NFL someday. I know my kids to run to the litter. They're never going to play in the NFL someday. But there are important values that they can learn through sports. There's teamwork, there's camaraderie, there's a lot of things that they can learn in athletic sports. And I agree with that. I do, but I guess my what takes me aback when I hear that, and maybe you could tell me I'm completely out to lunch on it, which you're allowed to because you haven't been on the show for 2 years and you're leaving after the show's over, so you never have to see me again. Um, but when I hear that, I'm like, okay, I get it. I understand that. Yes, those are values that can be beneficial for your child to learn, but aren't when you give me that response, it sounds to me like you're basically ignoring the values that your child will learn by prioritizing worship on Sundays and coming to church on Sundays. It's almost like you're saying, well, my child can come to church and not pick up any good values, or they can go to athletics and pick up these good values. And to me, while I agree that there are good values they can learn in athletics, those are values that are primarily beneficial in this life, whereas the value you learn by prioritizing God has eternal value. Am I out to lunch?
Not at all. We're still in the studio having breakfast. No, it's
It is lunchtime. Now we're getting hungry.
no, I agree. You know, that's our job as parents primarily is not to get our kids into Yale or Harvard or in the NFL. Our job is to get them to heaven. Well, our job is to bring them to Christ, who will get them to heaven. And that's when I hear those. Maybe I won't be so hard as to say excuses, but justifications. To say
I think
they're
I said excuses, but
okay. Well, then yeah, maybe you did. Well, then I'll say excuses. Yeah, and again, that's not satisfactory for the same reason that you're saying is that there's far exceeding value that they get from godliness, right? Well, I mean, Paul talks about that too. For physical training is of some value, but training in godliness is of lasting value. It's of eternal value, and so that's part of the sacrifice that we have to make, at least in our family that we've talked about. Is if sports do end up conflicting with church, then our priority is always going to be church. Our priority is God, then our family, um, then everything else, right?
yeah.
And so, right, that's I think that's you're kind of doing some theological gymnastics to say, well, I'm not getting anything out of church, so I'll go and have my kid learn teamwork in sports. That's not satisfactory. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and I, I guess leading up to the ultimate question, this will be the penultimate question. Let's put it
Mm,
that way. The second to last question, but it leads to the next question. I did one of the articles I found was written by a PCUSA pastor, which I've shared before is my former denomination, which I left for theological reasons. And I do feel like sometimes on the show, I give them too bad of a rap. I mean, I don't know if you saw this or not. I did a show probably a couple months ago now on a sermon that was given, and I don't apologize for anything that I said on this episode about a PCUSA pastor who stood up in the pulpit and told people that in the Garden of Eden, God lied to Adam and Eve, and the serpent told them the truth. And I was like, hey, look, you know what? If you got a pastor up there who's telling you you can trust Satan and not trust God, that's a real reason you should probably run away from that church.
red flag.
Yeah,
Yeah,
big red flag.
yeah.
So I do still have a lot of friends from my old church, my own denomination. So I don't want to make it seem like everybody in that denomination is like that. I can tell you from personal experience, I know some who are not. Obviously, I felt compelled that I could not, in good conscience, stay with that anymore. But that's all just a lead into what I read in this article. And I think the spirit of this article, the intent of this article, was kind of what were you hinted a little bit at the very beginning, and what we'll be getting to in the next question was it was talking about, well, how do we as Christians handle the reality that parents are choosing this for their kids? They are taking their kids to athletic events on Sunday mornings instead of church. And and so in that regard, I think as far as at least trying to address that question, I think that's a legitimate question to ask. I'm going to ask you the same thing in a moment. But the response that this person gave, some of their responses struck me as wrongheaded. And wrongheaded in the sense they almost seem to be throwing up their arms, almost saying like worship doesn't matter. Um, like a couple of the quotes that I'll read you here from this page, and this is the one if you want to follow along. It's the one with a little cartoon on the front
Mm.
that I gave you. um, to me, it said here, for example, our youth are often required to attend their Sunday sports commitment, and if they miss, they face consequences for not attending. They have to show up for their teams. Have to is actually in italics. They are needed in that exact time frame for a game. And my voice is going out on me again. And I mean, that was the first one that kind of got to me because I'm like, all right, I get it. We Salvation is by grace through faith. So it's not like if you miss church that you're destined for hell just because you missed coming to church on a particular Sunday. That being said, there are consequences for not prioritizing God in your life. Your sanctification process, the person you become and what God wants you to be, is going to be impacted if you don't prioritize God. So I I was kind of taken aback by the response of, well, they just have to be there. They have to be there. And like a later comment, she said kind of the same thing. She says, I don't want to use guilt to make them show up. I kind of can agree with her on that part. I think it was her. I could be speaking on the gender of this author. I apologize. It says, especially when these kids have absolutely no control over when their activities are scheduled. No, but they do, at least their families do have control over what activities they sign up for in the first place.
True.
You know, and so um I I I guess my reaction is when I read things like that, it seems to me almost like a surrender
Mm.
that we're just saying, well, it's not going to change. So we need to find other ways and exclusively other ways to connect with these kids. Talking about, well, make sure they come to youth group, which I agree with. Okay. Um, but is it the right answer to say, all right, to throw up our hands and say, all right, these parents aren't coming to worship. And so we need to just kind of suck it up, deal with it, and just try to connect with them in other ways. And I'll tell you why that answer bothers me. Youth group is important, absolutely.
Mhm.
Bible study is important, absolutely. But they're not worship. I mean, they are worship in the broad sense that everything we do is
Right.
worship, right? Our entire life is an act of worship. But you're not doing the same thing. You're not getting the same thing at those events as you do at a worship service. What were your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, so I have two thoughts. First of all, is you could almost turn that around and think, well, yes, the team needs your child to be at practice, but the church needs you there too. A lot of times, worship we think of worship as self-serving. Like, what am I getting out of it? You hear people all the time; they'll leave worship and say, "I just didn't get anything out of that."
That was Pastor Jay's message last week. You were so timely, man. Yeah.
Right? Yeah, it's uh, oftentimes church worship coming together, meeting together. The Bible doesn't say what's to serve you, right? We're meeting together to build each other up, to lift one another up as iron sharpens iron. We come together. Maybe the fact that you're there at worship, you have something that you can say to somebody and greet them who's in a really bad way or they're feeling down, and just a friendly greeting from you, you're a friend with them or something like that. You have that relationship where, yeah, I needed that today. I needed that encouragement. So we maybe have to get away from, and I think modern evangelicalism has kind of done a disservice in that we kind of the whole seeker sensitive movement. Well, how can our church serve you? Um, yeah, I think there's something to be said about the collective. We need to remember that it's not all about me. It's about what I can contribute, or how God can work through me. And sometimes it just means showing up, right? And so I think you could turn that argument around and say, yeah, our kids are needed at their football team or whatever, but they're needed at church. And the other thing is, if you consistently make the choice to not go to worship, to not go to church on a Sunday morning, then what we're conveying to our children is that it's not important, that it's not a priority. Um, no matter how you try to justify it, what they're learning is that it's not a priority. And I think we've gotten to that point because, and I love this quote, it says, "What one generation accept, or what one generation tolerates, the next one will accept." And so it goes on. So
You could say the
parents,
following one would then celebrate.
yeah,
Right?
and the
Just
third one
taking
will
it further.
celebrate.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so not only, church has become less and less of a priority in people's lives because it's been tolerated. We've allowed things to encroach on Sunday mornings. We've allowed things to encroach on our time together, and so we've tolerated it. And a lot of people are throwing up their hands now. People in ministry saying, "Well, what do you do?" Well, I think it's okay to be firm,
Hey, let me ask
lovingly.
you that question. So what do you do?
Yeah, and I'd say, and that's you got families all the time. It's a very practical question. As a parent myself, it's sometimes something we kind of have to wrestle with too. And so obviously you don't want to come from it from the standpoint of judgment or condemnation, but speak the truth in love and say, hey, we understand that this is a commitment, but also the other thing is for the majority of the time, sports are only for a season too, right? So if there's a church that's consistently, you see these families who are consistently involved in something. So they've got football this season, basketball this season, uh, field hockey, whatever it is. They're in something every single month of the year. I think it's okay to look at them in Christian love and say, "Hey, uh, we miss seeing you. We'd love to see more of you. I'd like to maybe sit down, talk with you, and talk about some priorities because uh, as your brother or sister in Christ. Um, I think our church would really benefit. Our fellowship would really benefit from having you to be a part of it. People will show up when they're needed. Just like this article saying, when somebody's needed, they're going to show up for it. And so, by empowering uh, people in the congregation to say, "Hey, I've got a part in this. I've got an investment in this church family," then they're going to make that sacrifice. They're going to make that commitment.
And I'll say something here that's probably very, very unpopular amongst a lot of churches. Um, if I've got, I mean, I am very much of the opinion that we don't prioritize the universal church as much as we should. Um, and that I think a lot of churches feel like they're in competition with other churches instead of in cooperation with other churches. So yeah, I think once you're part of a worship family, I've said many times before, I think people leave their churches far too easily. They shouldn't be doing that. But if I got somebody who comes to me, say here at Trinity, and they are just they're they're going to go to do youth sports on Sunday morning. Period. Nothing I say is going to convince them otherwise. Um, and I know there's a good Bible-based church just down the road that has a Saturday evening worship service. I can't be afraid to suggest to that person, say, well, then maybe you go here, you know, um, because ultimately, the priority is not how many people we have sitting in our individual seats at our particular church. If our priority is really the kingdom and God's kingdom, and if that person is going to be a part of just as much a part of God's kingdom a mile down the road as they are here in our congregation, in our sanctuary, then I'd rather have them in worship and have their children in worship. Um, so I do agree that I think we need to be creative in and not possessive, I guess, in thinking of what's best for the kingdom and for these people as a part of the kingdom. Um, and if they're not going to come to worship, then yeah, you still want to make sure you keep as much of a connection with them as you possibly can. So you want to do youth group, you want to get into Bible studies, you want to get in there during the week. But I agree with you, Ben, as far as you still want to also speak truth in love with grace. That this is all great, but what are you doing in your worship life? How are you worshiping? Because Bible study, for example, can be in a certain sense even more about us than worship is, in the sense that we're learning, we're working on our relationship to connect closer with God. Whereas a worship service is really primarily it's directed towards Him.
Hmm.
It's not about what we get out of it. It's about us lifting Him up exclusively. Not that we don't do that when we gather in other gatherings too. Sure, we do. We'll open up in prayer. You may sing a song. So there may be elements of these other things that are worship like elements, but they're not a substitute for the worship service. So, um, what would you say? I guess my question is how. I want to make sure I say this delicately. How long do you take? When do you wipe the dust off your feet, Pastor? Man, I'm going to emphasize Pastor now. When you've got somebody who, because let's face it, we can take this more broadly. We all know what a creaster is.
Mm.
All right. So it's not just youth sports that are getting in the way. All right. You have people that will prioritize any number of other things over coming to church on Sunday morning. Um, at what point is there a point where you just kind of say, you know what? I'll just take what they're giving me. I've said what I can say, and at this point, I just need to leave it up to the conviction of the Holy Spirit.
I mean, I think the conviction of the Holy Spirit does play a major role, and the way that you can get to the point of speaking the truth in love, and to be effective with that is to have a relationship with the person. If your congregant only sees you on Christmas or Easter, you don't really have a relationship with them outside of that, they're probably not going to respond very well. Um, so I think, insofar as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone, right? And everything that we can do to be inviting and to be uh, trying to support that family, that person, whoever it is, uh, as a pastor, maybe, or ministry team, maybe that means throughout the week, hey, when can we meet up for coffee? I'd like to just sit down and talk with you. like we say, everything. Our life is worship. We can meet and worship in the broad sense in any kind of way. And the hope is always to bring them back. Again, I love what you say. It's not about getting butts in our pews or butts in any individual
Right.
pew. We're not in competition with other churches, but out of genuine concern. I think that that comes across. People know when you really care about them, when you really care about. I've had people come up and say, I'm just not feeling fed wherever, and say, you know what? Well, first of all, have you considered X, Y, or Z? Have you really stuck it out? Have you really tried certain things? But also, just like you said, well, are you going somewhere at least? Are you being connected with a Bible believing church that's going to build you up, that's going to feed you the Word of God, and so where your gifts can be recognized and used? And so I think it comes back to relationships. I think ultimately is that people go where they're wanted, where they're needed, when they feel a sense of belonging. There's been studies that show, people leave. One of the crucial elements of a new time guest coming to a church after the first, was it 6 months or something, is if they have at least three new
New connections,
relationships
right?
that
New relations, right?
exactly. And so it's all about relationship because it's that's what's going to drive people, and the gospel is relational, but it's not meant to be kept to ourselves. And so that's part of what it means to be making disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything that I've commanded you. Right? That's all part of the Great Commission. Is it's discipleship, teaching, and you can't do that without relationship.
I like that a lot. Anything else that you wanted to share on this topic that I didn't ask you about?
No, I think this kind of covered a lot.
All right. See, that just shows how thorough my preparation is and my preparation from like late last night. There we go. All right. Sorry. I was trying to push a button and it wasn't working. All right. Well, thank you all very much. And thank you to Pastor Ben for that extremely, I thought, beneficial conversation. Hopefully, it connected with something in there connected with you out there. Um, just by way of reminder, if you do have another question you'd like to get on a future episode of Hey Ask Me Stuff, go to this website right here, trinityjoppa.org/ask me stuff. Put it there in that, fill out that form with whatever your question is, anything about the Bible, about Christianity, about different world religions, God, atheists, whatever. I was joking with Pastor Jay the other day. The number one way to get clicks, I think, and to get views is just to talk about atheists because they like to come out and disagree with you. So ask me questions about atheism. That'd be great. Get more views that way. But seriously, put it in there, and we'd be happy to take a look at it. Maybe you'll see it on a future episode. Um, I had mentioned before, and I don't know if Pastor Ben, you've been following this, but we had set a goal of reaching 2,000 subscribers by June 30th. We actually reached it over 2 weeks ago. So we were almost 6 months ahead of schedule.
Awesome.
And I've been promising people that we would set a new goal and I would tell them what it was. Um, and just kind of looking at how the analytics are looking right now. What I'd like to ask you all out there to help us do is, you know what? Let's shoot for 2,500. Let's shoot for 2,500 subscribers by that same deadline. It's all up to God. It's so I don't. We make it, we don't make it, but we always like to be pushing forward and striving for something. So by June 30th, let's see if we can get to 2,500 by June 30th. If you like what you're seeing on here and you haven't subscribed yet, click the subscribe button, share the channel with other people, tell them what you see. We would really, really appreciate that because it's a new way of doing ministry nowadays. It's connecting with people online, and we're seeing more and more of that. And we are just very, very blessed and thankful to God for all that He has done here. So
Amen.
that's it. We will be back next week on Tuesday night at 6:30. Weather permitting, will be live this time. We've got 3 weeks without being live, but we will be back live next week. It is still the hope and the plan that I will be having worship leader Chris Boggs on the show that night, where we will be talking about, is there a minimum standard for worship music, for the how good it is,
Mm.
how good a performer is, the blessing. So we're going to be talking a lot about God's gifts, which is also our theme for the 150 and things like that. God permitting next week. There's still a few things that we're kind of waiting to make sure. So there is a chance that might not be the topic next week, but that is the goal. We've been trying to get that on all month, and hopefully that will happen next week. Everybody, if you're in the comments section now, while you're watching this, is the time to join with me in saying one more thank you to Pastor Ben Lander. Thank you for coming on. I
Thanks for
appreciate it.
having me.
Oh,
Thanks,
it's been
Ken.
great. I've missed you for these past 2
Oh, I
years.
missed you too.
It's not as fun talking to myself as it is talking to you. So, um, don't be a stranger. Come back. You did, by the way, when you left, you did promise me. They said, "Oh, maybe we could do like a Zoom thing or
Hmm.
something where we could do something." So I might just hold you to that at some
Hey,
point to get you
yeah, it's
back on
still an
again.
option. Absolutely.
So
Let me know.
you want to say goodbye to anybody? Hi to anybody? Hi to your wife? You said you hi to your wife yet?
I mean, she just left downstairs not that long ago. But hi, Katie. Hi, honey. Hi, kids. Yeah, anybody in the chat, if you're watching this, and if I don't see all of the comments and you say hi, I'm going to say hi back to you. And it's a pleasure to be here. So thank you, Ken. It's great to be back.
All right. Thank you, Ben. And thank you all for watching. See you all next week. God bless.